Hello everyone, welcome to the Stitches in STEM YouTube channel. My name is Michaela and this is podcast episode number 7. So it's been 3 weeks since I last uploaded, but that video was actually recorded a week beforehand. It just took me that long to edit and upload it because I was away for that week, so I didn't get to edit and upload it until I got back. Which means that I have a lot to talk about today. So I have 2 finished objects and I think 5 whips. So if you haven't already, grab a project, one that you can just sink into while you watch this video. Grab a drink, tea, coffee, beer, wine, whatever you want, and get comfortable because this might be a long one. My first finished object is of course what I'm wearing, and that is my Kuutar top by Sari Nordland. This pattern has lace panels on the front and back until the underarm, at which point they're joined in the round, and the rest of the body is worked in stockinette. And it also has this kind of A-line shape at the top where the lace panels come in a bit and the straps are closer to the neck rather than out at the shoulders. So it's not a true halter style top, but it kind of resembles one. When I last spoke about this, I had just finished the front lace panel and I was partly through the back lace panel. I think I had about 2/3 of the back lace panel done, maybe less. And I was very confident that I would get the back lace panel done before I went away on that trip, and then I would be able to join the panels in the round and just work in stockinette for the rest of that holiday. You may guess that that did not happen. So I brought that back lace panel to a knit social event the day before I went away, and I knew it wasn't the most sociable kind of knit, but I figured I would bring it and I'd bring something else as well in case it turned out that I couldn't actually work on the lace panel, which was very likely. But I found it okay. So the event was 2 hours long and I was able to work on the panel while I was still chatting to people and not make any mistakes, or so I thought. After 2 hours, which was about 10 rows of work, I realised that I'd been swapping my decreases the whole time. So instead of knit two together, I was doing slip slip knit and vice versa. To me the effect was very obvious, it just didn't look right, but I was looking at it up close and I did ask the people at the knit social event what they thought, and everyone agreed it's fine, you can't notice it, don't frog it, but it was bothering me. And I also asked on Instagram whether I should frog it or not, and a small majority of people said to frog it. I think it was like 53% said to frog it, so it was really close. In previous situations like that where I've made a mistake and thought about frogging it and asked on Instagram, I nearly always know already that I'm going to frog it and I just need the confirmation from Instagram. But this time I genuinely didn't know. I was hopping back and forth between one mindset and the other, saying, oh, it's not that noticeable, I can leave this panel in the back and it won't be noticeable. And the other part of me saying, look, it was only 2 hours of work, just frog it and redo it. I was so close to finishing that back lace panel that I could see the light at the end of the tunnel and I didn't want to go back and have to do it again. Ultimately, I did decide to frog it, so that was what delayed me because I brought it with me on my trip and I frogged it on the trip, and I think I got it done. Yes, I did get the back lace panel done on the trip, and then I joined it in around when I was in the airport coming home. So it's funny watching my last episode back because in the episode I said I hope to get this joined in the round before the flight, and I did get it joined in the round before the flight, but it was just the flight home instead of the flight out. So anyway, got it jointed around, and from then on it really did fly off the needles. I just powered on through to get it done. So the yarn is Hobby Rainbow Cotton 8/4 in the colour dark brown, which is 100% cotton. And I mentioned this in my spring stash busting video because this has got to be one of the oldest yarns in my stash, and it's been sitting there for so long. I think I checked back in my emails to see when I bought it and it was like 2021. So it's been there for about 3 years and I was very eager to get rid of it, and I'm really glad I did. I love the finished top, I really do. With the stash yarns that I'm working through, I'm not that excited about them. So although I love the finished pieces, I'm not enjoying working with the yarns as much, which is unfortunate because the pattern is great. For me, this wasn't like it wasn't a passion project. So I'll insert some B-roll footage showing the finished object. I did make a couple of modifications, which I've talked about before. So the first one was that in one of the panels, I was worried that the lace would extend too far down and it would be too revealing. So I modified the last kind of lace section to have smaller lace holes, I guess. So wherever in the pattern it instructed me to work through a yarn over, I actually worked that yarn over through the back loop to make that hole smaller. But I only did that on one of the panels because I figured I would just follow the pattern as written on the other panel, and depending on if it was too revealing or not, I could just wear it back to front because it's symmetrical, it's identical on both sides. And the other modification I made was based on Ravelry suggestions to join in the round straight after the lace panels, as opposed to working a couple of centimetres of stockinette as is recommended in the pattern, because a lot of people said that the armhole is too deep. So I did do that. I joined straight in the round after the lace panel, but I made my straps quite short at the top here. I prefer the look of it being higher up to and closer to my neck. So I made these straps quite short. They're basically made by working an I-cord from the front, working an I-cord from the back, and then using a Kitchener stitch or grafting them together. And I made mine about an inch shorter than what the pattern recommended, just because that was the look I was going for. But I should have probably considered that when I was joining the stockinette, or when I was joining the lace panels in the round, because it's a little bit close to my armpit. Like, it's not tight, it's not digging in, but I can feel it. So that's the only thing that I kind of wish I did differently, but it's not a big deal and it doesn't bother me that much. So when you're working these panels, you have an I-cord edge all the way up the side and the same on the back. So then when you join in the round, there's techniques that Sari Nordland introduces in the pattern to make sure that that I-cord join is seamless between the two panels. And that part can be quite fiddly. So as I said, I did do that before my flight. I actually did it in the airport. Which meant that I was sitting on the floor at the departure gate in a queue that had no chairs or anything. We were all just sitting on the floor, and I was like desperately trying to sort all of this out before we got onto the plane, because I knew I wouldn't be able to do it once I got onto the plane. So I just had like random groups of stitches hanging off stitch markers, you know, on hold around the circumference of the top and things like that, and it was very fiddly, but I got it in the end. The other thing that I don't think I did right was at the very end you have 3 stitches for the for the front underarm and 3 stitches for the back underarm, which were both remainders of the I-cords on either side, and you have to graft them together using a Kitchener style stitch. And I don't think I did that very well. I don't think it's noticeable. I just don't think it worked for me. And the reason I think it didn't work is because the I-cords are going the opposite directions. So I think a Kitchener stitch works when, if the I-cords are going the opposite direction, you can't Kitchener the very far right stitch of one I-cord into the very far right stitch of the other I-cord. Like, you have to kind of shift over half a stitch, if you know what I mean, right? Maybe I'm wrong, but the way I was looking at it, I was like, because I was counting my 3 stitches and counting my 3 stitches on the other side, and I was like, wait, they don't line up. I can't. So I tried to do my best, and I don't think it looks perfect, but it's under my arm. I don't think anyone's going to be inspecting it that closely. For the bottom, I did a folded hem as is instructed. I think Sari Nordland instructs you to bind off the bottom and then sew it down, but I used the same tutorial I always do for doing a sewn down hem, which basically involves keeping your stitches alive but kind of binding them off at the same time as sewing them to the stitches in the top. So that's what I did, and I've done that tutorial before. It's a bit tedious, but I really like the final effect, and I've gotten a lot faster at it as well. I think a lot of my summer tops have used that technique, so I've gotten a lot of practice with it, and I'm definitely getting faster. I think I did a top last year that used that method, and it took me days. It took me days to do it, but this one I think took me a couple hours, which was fine. Oh, and I used a 3mm needle for the stockinette and a 2.5mm needle for the lace. The pattern does recommend you go down needle size for the lace. I'm not sure why, but that's what I did. Another modification I made was to leave out increases in the body. So the pattern has you increase throughout the stockinette portion of the body to create an A-line shape, but I left those out because I wanted mine to go straight. But it actually is still going kind of outwards, A-line. So it doesn't bother me. I would prefer it to be straighter and drapier, but that's probably to do with my yarn choice as well. Like, the 100% cotton is obviously quite stiff. On the other hand, this is fresh off the blocking mat. Like, I literally put it on an hour ago, so I expect with wear it will relax a bit. It's also possible that the A-line shape is partly a result of the folded hem, which I have done before, but I've never done one this short. So I usually do them like 1.5 centimeters. This one's about I didn't measure it. I'd say it's about 1.1 centimeters. It's quite short, and it does seem to have an effect of curling outwards. So whenever I do these kind of hems, they do fold, they flick straight up, until you block them and then they relax back down. But this one is still kind of curling outwards a little bit, which is probably pulling the rest of the top out. Especially at the point where I actually started the hem. I don't know what it is, maybe it's the way I wove in that end there, but it's really, really flicking up, and I'm going to try and see if I can fix that, because although the A-line effect overall isn't really bothering me, that particular point is a little bit frustrating and it's just drawing my eye when I wear it. So I'm going to see if I can fix that in a way to make it lay a bit flatter. So that is everything I have to say for my Kuutar top, and I'm really happy with it. It's also a big stash busting project that I've gotten out of the way now. Like this yarn, it was a big cake. If you saw my stash busting video, you will see that this was a big cake of yarn and it was taking up so much space in my yarn press. So I'm so happy it's gone, and yeah, it's made into this beautiful top. My next finished object is a pair of vanilla socks, and these are actually new cast on since the last episode as well. Hold them back here. So these are just a very basic vanilla sock. I made these toe up, and the yarn is from Homespun House sock set Advent, which I got last year. The Advent calendar came with 4 sock sets, and you could get one that had where each sock set had 100-gram main skein and a 20-gram mini skein, or you could get one where each sock set had 50-gram main skein and a 20-gram mini skein. So I got the 50-gram option because most of my socks weigh about 65 grams total, so I figured a 70-gram sock set would be enough. At the point that I bought it, I had already bought the Olivia and Oliver Fibres Advent calendar, so I mean it was obviously quite expensive, so I just figured the 70-gram sock set option would be better for my finances as well as for my yarn stash. I still was a bit unsure about how big of a sock I would be able to get out of a 50-gram main skein, because I thought I might have to use the contrast colour for the toe, the heel and the cuff. I wasn't sure if I'd be able to get a full length sock out of a 50-gram main skein if I was doing the heel in the main colour as well. So that's why I worked these toe up. This is my second pair of toe up socks. I usually do cuff down, but for the reason that I just explained, I did them toe up so I could just work the socks until I'd run out of the main colour. Sorry. So I cast on with Judy's Magic Cast On, and I also did an ergonomic toe on this, or an anatomical toe I guess, on these, which I've done before, and basically just which basically means just increasing more on one side of the toe than on the other. So the increases stop here on this side, and then I just knit flat for the rest of the toe. And this is going to be my right sock, because this will be like where my big toe is, and then it goes down to my baby toe here. If you want to know the stitch count, they are in the Ravelry project page for another pair of socks that I've made. I haven't written them up in this one yet, I don't think, but I'll link the project page that has that stitch count in the description box, even though I'm not going to talk about it obviously in this podcast because it's not a current project. The yarn is 75% merino and 25% nylon, and this is week 2 of the Advent calendar, so I already made week 1. I made it back in January I think, and the rest of the sock sets have kind of laid untouched since then. So I wanted to start moving these sock sets out of my stash before, I suppose before this Christmas, because I don't want to have Advents from last year left over this year. So I'm giving myself a lot of time still, because I obviously have this one done. I'm working on the third one now, which I'll show in the whip section. Heel turn and gusset, like gusset decreases or gusset increases in this case, which is my preferred heel option when I'm working cuff down. And a lot of the tutorials and patterns that I found had kind of a slip stitch section on the bottom, so they would work the slip stitch heel flap exactly the same way they would if they were doing a cuff down, which meant that your heel was basically upside down. So you had your slip stitch panel on the bottom, and then the rest of your heel worked up the back of the ankle, I guess. And I didn't want that, so I scoured the internet looking for tutorials for a slip stitch heel flap and gusset made this way. And I found a couple of different resources, but not directly patterns or tutorials. So I ended up trying to kind of MacGyver my own slip stitch heel flap and gusset, and I did get close, but I didn't get exactly what I was looking for. So I actually redid the heel 3 times trying to get the kind of heel that I wanted, until I remembered that I had a pattern in my library the whole time that had exactly what I was trying to do, and I don't know how I forgot about it. So anyway, that pattern is linked down below if you want to do a toe up sock with a heel flap and gusset like this. It's by Jo Tor, and it's called Vanilla Toe Up Socks with Choice of Heel Flap or Gusset or something like that. It's a big wordy title, but I will obviously link it in the Ravelry project page and down below. I'll link the pattern down below. It's very similar to what you would do if you were doing a cuff down. The main difference that I can see is that your heel turn has more stitches at the longest section. So if your heel turn is like a wedge, if you can imagine like this, if you're doing a toe up, you have more stitches along this part than you would if you were doing a cuff down. Because when you're doing a cuff down, you start off at the bottom of that wedge and you work turns, or you work, I guess, short rows to extend that wedge. You end up with fewer stitches at the top of that wedge than you would if you were doing a toe up. Because when you're doing a toe up, you say you have a 60 stitch sock, you split those 60 stitches in half, so you have 30 stitches, and you actually have those 30 stitches at that wedge, and then you start decreasing them, I think. I can't remember now. It's something like that. Anyway, the point is that there is a little bit of extra fabric on the heel turn when you're doing a toe up than if you did it cuff down. But I don't notice it. I suppose there's so much negative ease that it doesn't make a difference. The other thing is that you do gusset increases. Obviously if you're doing a cuff down, you would do some gusset decreases. And when you're doing your gusset decreases, at least in my case, and I would assume in most cases, you don't have the same number of stitches at the end of your increases that you would if you were doing it cuff down. So if you're doing a slip stitch, heel flap and gusset cuff down, you have more stitches along the heel flap and fewer stitches at this section at the heel turn, basically the end of the heel turn if you're working cuff down. But when you're doing a toe up, those stitches are kind of transferred to this part of the heel turn. So you have more stitches in this part of the heel turn and less stitches in this part of the heel flap, if that makes sense. So what this pattern has you do is an extra row of increases just before you start the heel flap. And you can kind of see that the way it is shaped here. You can see those increases. I personally need those increases. Like without those increases, my heel flap would have only been 24 rows, whereas it's usually 36 rows. So I would do 18, right and wrong side rows. And a 24 row heel flap would be too short. But at the same time, when I was adding in those increases, I was like, this is just one row of increases. How is this going to make a difference to the fit? But it really does, because I did try it with the 24 row heel flap and it didn't fit. So after the heel flap, I just continued working in stockinette for the leg, and I did a 60 round leg, which I normally do, and I managed to get that out of the ball of yarn, and I still have, I think, 3 grams of yarn left or something, a very small amount, but yeah, so I got a full length sock out of it. And then I did a 2x2 rib for the cuff. I also worked these socks on my 9-inch circulars, and after I last talked about 9-inch circulars, a lot of you suggested that I get a second pair to work socks 2 at a time, because I mentioned that I like working my socks 2 at a time. And that was always my plan, and that was what I did. So I worked these 2 at a time. I did like 30 rounds on one sock, 30 rounds on the next sock, and that also meant that my yarn management was easier in terms of the fact that I was working from a 50 gram ball of yarn. I was able to just work both socks and not have to worry about, working one sock and accidentally using more yarn than I should have and not having enough yarn for the second sock, which wouldn't have been a problem anyway because I have yarn left over. But yeah, I really enjoyed working these 2 at a time on my 9-inch circulars, and honestly they are the best fitting socks I've made in a long time. So I mentioned when I talked about my Morris socks that my gauge was seemingly a little bit tighter on the 9-inch circulars, and I wasn't sure if that was to do with the lace pattern or it was to do with the 9-inch circulars, but I can confirm that it is to do with the 9-inch circulars because these fit really, really well. So my gauge had kind of been getting a little bit looser on the magic loop, and I wasn't sure how because I was counting the same number of stitches per inch, but my socks always felt a bit looser, especially after blocking. They seemed to just grow, and I don't think it was a problem with the yarn because I was using the same kind of yarn that I've always used, so I wasn't really sure what was happening. But with the 9-inch circulars, they've kind of just back in, so they feel really good. I'm really happy with how they turned out. Finally, the other thing is the cuff. It's a 2x2 stretchy cast off and bind off cast off. It's a tutorial by Nimble Needles, which I'll link down below. It does flare a little bit, but because socks are obviously worn with negative ease, when I wear them on my leg you can't see the flare, so that's really good. I've already started working on a pair of socks with the 3rd sock set from the Advent, which I will talk about in the whip section. Moving on to whips, the project that's been on my needles the longest is my Poppy Tee, which is a pattern by Petite Knit. And I hear what you're saying, Michaela, that looks like it's finished. Well, it's not, because I have to redo the neckline, but I'll get into that. The pattern is by Petite Knit. It's this all over stockinette tee with contiguous construction. I think it's contiguous. I've heard people call this English style, European style and contiguous. I don't know if they're all the same. Basically you cast on for the back panel and the shoulders, and similarly to a raglan you kind of work back and forth while increasing, but you increase every round, so it's quite rapid and you get this seam running along the back as a result, which is really nice. And if you're familiar with the Poppy Tee, you will notice that I'm making modifications, which most noticeably are the finishings. So in the pattern the finishings are all 1x1 ribbing. I think they're definitely ribbing. I think they're 1x1. I have chosen to do folded edges for my finishings. So specifically I'm following the kind of folded details that are on the tee number 1, which I also made a few weeks ago or a few months ago. So for the collar, that basically means picking up stitches from the inside of the top, knitting a few rounds of stockinette, and then sewing it down to the outside so you get this nice seam across the front. And on the sleeves and the hem you sew down to the inside, so you just get this nice neat folded edge, which I really like. So I've actually blocked this sleeve. Actually, this is a good example of the folded edge and the effect of blocking that I was talking about earlier. So this sleeve has not been blocked, and you can see that the edge is flipping up, especially around the bottom, so here. Can you see that? Whereas on this sleeve, which has been blocked, the edge is folding. Let me see if I can hold this better. It's really awkward to hold. The edge is obviously lying flat. So you can see the effect of blocking in that sense, and it looks really good there. I'm really happy with it. I've also done the same for the hem, but I haven't blocked that either. So I have a lot to say about this. So buckle in. First of all, the yarn that I'm using is Knitting for Olive Cotton Merino, and I'm holding 2 strands together throughout. So for the main colour I'm using the colours Piglet and Powder, 1 strand of each. And for the contrast colour I'm using the colour Navy Blue. And I really love these colours together. This navy blue is just beautiful. I would love to knit something else in this navy blue colour, maybe in the merino yarn. I'm definitely going to keep it in mind for future projects. I really love the colour. For the stripes I'm using a jogless stripe method, where you basically knit 1 round in your new colour, and when you get back to the first stitch you pick up the stitch below, which would have been in your old colour, place it on your needle and then knit the first 2 stitches together, so you get this jogless effect. I showed it more in my last episode, but I really like how it looks, and yeah, some of the stripes are really seamless and I'm really happy with it. I've also started weaving in some of my ends. I've woven in a lot of ends, I still have some to do. That obviously comes with the territory of doing stripes. For the folded edges on the sleeves, when I've done this kind of folded edge before, I usually do, for example, 5 rounds of knitting, 1 purl round, and then 4 rounds of knitting before folding it down. The logic in my head was that doing 4 rounds of knitting before folding it down meant that it would lay flat, because you, instead of getting a curve, you would get this kind of curve on the outside and a flat edge on the inside, because there's fewer rows on this side. But when I was knitting this, I also noticed that, and it seems obvious, that purl round would count as a round on the inside, because the body of the stitch lies above the purl bump, if you know what I mean. I'll try and show what I mean. There's 5 rounds of knitting here, and then you have a purl bump, but the body of that stitch, or that round of stitches where I did the purls, lies on the other side. So when you have that, the body of that stitch, when I say the body, I don't know, I just made that up. Does that make any sense? When you have the main part of that stitch and then 4 rounds of knitting, you actually have essentially 5 rounds. So you would still get that curving effect, and I have always noticed that, and I've always wondered why that is if there's fewer stitches on the inside. But there's not really fewer stitches on the inside because the purl stitch falls to the inside, if that makes sense. So what I did with this one was 5 rounds of knitting, 1 purl round, and then 3 rounds of knitting, so that I would have a total of 4 rounds on the inside. And I think it worked out really well. I'm going to try and show a close-up so you can see what I mean, but the inside is lying completely flat, where the outside has a nice curve to it. So I'm really happy I figured that out. For the hem, I actually did 6 rounds of knitting, 1 purl round, and 4 knit rounds. So it's just slightly longer on the hem, and I'm really happy with it. So that's mostly everything about my poppy tee, and the reason it's not finished is because I'm not happy with the collar and I'm going to redo it. So you can see I have these threads hanging out from sewing it down. So I followed the instructions in the pattern for picking up the stitches in terms of the number of stitches, and then I just worked a few rounds of stockinette. I can't remember how many. It looks about like maybe 12 or 13 rounds of stockinette, and then I bound off and then I sewed it down. You can see that it is doing this funny thing here, and I have actually blocked the collar, just the collar, because I wanted to see if blocking would help it. And before blocking it was kind of hard to tell what the problem was, because it wasn't really lying flat either. It was kind of just puffing up. There was nothing really holding it, or forcing it to fold over. So it wasn't folding over, and it was sewn down, but it was almost like it was like a bubble instead of like a flat collar. So it was hard to tell what the problem was, and once I blocked it I could definitely see the pickup rate along the side is too much. I did follow the pickup rate in the pattern, but I imagine because it's a 1x1 rib it's not as much of a problem, because that rib will cinch in the stitches, whereas when you're just doing stockinette it causes this ruffling effect, which is much more obvious after blocking. So when I saw that I actually felt a bit relieved, because I was like, okay, well that's an easy fix, because before that I didn't know what it was and I didn't want to abandon my folded collar, but I wasn't sure how I was going to fix it. And then after blocking it was kind of obvious that it was just a problem with picking up the stitches, so I am going to redo this. So the pickup rate along here is, I think it's 2 stitches in every 3 rows. I'm going to drop it down to 1 stitch in every 2 rows and see if that helps. Along the diagonal edge I think it's fine, but that's 1 stitch in every row, I think. It was a weird one. I remember looking at it and being like, really, you want me to pick that up that many stitches? But I suppose if it was doing 1x1, I suppose if I was doing 1x1 ribbing it would, cinch in. The problem is that I'm doing stockinette. So yeah, it's not a big problem, it's an easy fix, and hopefully by the next time you see this it'll be done. The other thing, I'm knitting this on 3.5mm needles. It's quite heavy. I weighed it and I think it was about 320 grams. Once it's finished I'll weigh it properly and I'll put those details on my Ravelry page. But that was kind of affecting the length that I wanted to make it, because I was trying it on and I wasn't sure. It was kind of in that in between where I was like, ooh, maybe I could add more, but if I added more I wasn't sure how I would manage the whole stripe situation, because I'm doing 8 rows of the main colour for the stripes and I have 8 rows here. So if I added more rows I thought maybe I would have to add another stripe, in which case then it would be way too long. The fact that it's so heavy, I'm kind of convinced it will stretch a little bit, so yeah, I'm really happy with the length anyway. If it doesn't stretch I'm happy with it, if it does I'm also happy with it, unless it stretches comically long, which I don't think it will. So yeah. My next whip is my favourite project at the moment, and it is my sweet shop blanket. Look how much progress I've made. It goes this way as well. So since the last episode, in the last episode I had 5 squares done, and I have a lot more than 5 done now. I think I have 41. There's 41 squares done now, which is loads. And if you remember in the last episode I'm going to have a total of 154 squares. So I'm making good progress on it, and the reason for that is that I'm just loving working on this. I'm just so happy with it and I'm really enjoying it. So it takes me about 25 minutes to do a square, and I'm adding about 12 squares a week. So I might get like 2 squares done a day on average, sometimes less, sometimes more. The yarn for the colours is Olivia and Oliver Fibres Advent Calendar from last year, which I'm working through. And the main colour is Knitting for Olive Merino in the colour Cloud. In my last episode I asked for advice on yarn management, because I am holding the yarn double. So I had a 20g mini skein. I was winding the mini skein into a ball, and then I was dividing that ball into 2 10g balls, but I was keeping the 2 balls connected. And the 2 10g balls are obviously, when wound on a ball winder, are very loose and just like little loose lumps of yarn. So it was kind of difficult to manage them, and after I uploaded that video I figured out a really obvious way to manage the yarn that I'm embarrassed I didn't notice before. So basically what I'm doing is I wind off my 20g skein into a ball, I wind off my 10g ball as I was doing before, and then I was winding both 10g balls back into a 20g ball of yarn. So it is still a bit like loose, but it's a lot better than what it was. So you can see what I mean. and it obviously has a lot more structure to it, and it's easier to manage. So, and then I just pop it into my clean sock. I have to specify clean in case some people think that I'm using dirty socks, and I can pull from there. So it's working out really well. In terms of the main colour, the cream colour, I bought 550 grams of it, so 11 balls, because I have roughly 500 grams of the coloured yarn. But I think I'm going to have a lot left over because I should be using 1 ball per roughly 14 squares, and I've done 41 squares and I've only just finished with 2 balls, so that's 20 squares per ball roughly. So I should have some left over, which will be really nice because I can use it for a garment. I've never used any for olive merino for a garment before. I think it'd be nice to know like a tank top, but obviously that's for a different day. I'm using 4mm needles for this, and I don't really have much else to say apart from the weaving in ends issue. So I mentioned in my last video that I am following a tutorial by Stephen West for weaving in the ends he calls it the Weave and Stephen method, and you basically end up with your end woven in just one direction, which is fine for a blanket. I wouldn't do it for a garment, but for a blanket it's fine. But now I'm not really sure what to do, because if I cut these, they will definitely come loose. Not all the way loose, but like, you know, they might come out of 1 or 2 stitches and it will just look messy on the back. So I'm not sure if I can tie them into knots, pair them off and tie them into knots, which I have done in a few squares at the start, and I'm just going to see how they hold up. I know knots can come loose. I feel pretty confident in these knots, but I hope I don't have to eat my words. So yeah, I've tied a few of these into knots. I'm going to keep working the blanket and see if these come loose, and if they don't, I might just tie the rest of them into knots. Another option is fabric glue, which I've never used. If you have any insights on that, let me know, because I've never used it. I don't know how it works, if it would work, so I would appreciate if anyone has some insight on that. It might look like random placement, but if you saw my last video, you'll see that I have very methodically planned out each and every square, and it's working out really well so far. But there are some things that I didn't notice when I was planning them out. So for example, here we've got, this is colour number 5, and we've got 5, 5 and 5 going diagonally, and I don't know if it's noticeable, like if it draws your eye in a bad way. Also, like here we've got, this is colour number 8, and this is colour number 9, so we've got 8 and 9, and then down here somewhere else here we've got 8 and 9 again. So I don't know if that's like, it's probably something that I'm overthinking. And also here we've got, this is colour number 3, and we've got 3, 3 and 3 here. So yeah, again, I'm probably just overthinking it, and I don't think when the blanket is finished, I don't think it's going to be too noticeable in a bad way, so it's fine. I'm trying to just enjoy the process and not get stressed out by the location of colours in a blanket. So yeah, I absolutely love this. It hasn't been like a passive whip for me. It's not something that just sits in the background until I feel like I want to work on it. Like, I'm actively trying to make progress on this every day, and I'm really enjoying it. I'm starting to get into the yellows now, as you can see. The first 4 rows only contained colours 1 to 10, so I wound up colours 1 to 10, and I'm nearly finished the 4th row. I've got 3 squares left to do, and then I'm going to wind up some more colours so I can start working the next section, which will be a lot of yellows and greens, and I'm really excited to get into that. And sorry, I should mention the pattern is by Laura Penrose, but if you are on Instagram or YouTube at all, you probably, or Ravelry, you probably know that already. It's a very popular pattern, and I can see why. I would also say about the pattern that it's quite wordy. It's not my usual style of pattern. Like, there's paragraphs rather than like bullet points. If I looked away from the pattern for a while and then went back to it, trying to find where I wasn't as easy as it would be in patterns that are like, you know, laid out with bullet points or numbers or things like that. But it does have some nice illustrations. It's got a schematic where you can colour in your own squares, which I really like. I didn't do that. I did mine on Excel, as you'll know if you watched my last episode. I still would recommend the pattern. I have really enjoyed making this. I kind of like to plan out my projects in terms of how long I think they're going to take me, so I can like plan it for the year and, you know, figure out, well, I want to knit all of these things. Is that actually realistic? So I kind of allocated 12 weeks to this, and that wasn't based on anything at all. I was completely arbitrary, and when I started knitting this and I realised it was going to take me longer than 12 weeks, initially I was a bit disappointed because I was like, oh no, I have to do it in 12 weeks. And I was like, why? Why do I have to do it in 12 weeks? I don't have to do it in 12 weeks. Like, it doesn't matter. Nobody has set that deadline except myself. So at the moment it's probably going to take me between 16 and 20 weeks. And I'm not trying to rush through it. I genuinely am enjoying it. So I'm not going to try and purposely do more squares per week to get it down to, you know, less than 14 or 12 weeks or whatever. Now that I know how long the squares take me and how many squares I can get done per week, I can obviously set more realistic expectations and manage my expectations, because setting a random deadline of 12 weeks was just setting myself up for failure, to be honest. And that's not how I like to live my life. My next whip is my other favourite project, which is another pair of vanilla socks. And I love these. I love the colours so much. These are, so the main colour is from a Homespun House Advent. It's week 3. But I didn't use the contrast colour that came with that sock set because I liked it, but I didn't like it with the pink. So I'll show you actually. This was the colour that came with this main colour. Let's see if I can block out that cream so you can see. I wasn't really feeling it, you know. So I just bought this cream yarn. This is Kremka Edelweiss Alpaca 4-ply. And I can't remember the colour name, but it's just a cream. It's very basic. I get this in my local yarn shop and I really love this yarn because it comes in 25-gram balls. So whenever I'm looking for a contrast colour for socks, I always gravitate towards this one. They have a really good range of colours, I think, and it means that I can get 25 grams, use up most of it in the contrast, like cuff, heel and toe, and not have to worry about having yarn left over. So it's really great. I really like this yarn. Sorry, I went looking for the label but I can't find it. But this yarn, the Kremka Soul Wool, or sorry, the Kremka Edelweiss, is alpaca, and it does have a synthetic fibre in there. I think polyamide. I can't remember, but I'll put the details on the screen because it is a sock yarn, or it is suitable for socks. I think it's so soft that it would kind of make you think, really, is that a sock yarn? But it does have a synthetic yarn in there, so I think it's okay. Again, I'm just doing a very basic vanilla sock. I'm doing 60 rounds for the leg. These are obviously cuffed down, so I'm going to do a standard slip stitch heel and gusset with the contrast colour. So I am going to do a contrast heel for these and a contrast toe. And this is the first sock, which I only cast on 3 days ago, I think. So that is incredibly fast for me. I've finished the leg on this and I'm going to cast on the second sock this weekend and hopefully catch up, get the leg done, and then I can do the heel on both. So, you know, I got my little 2 at a time method going on there. A bit of mental acrobatics to convince myself that that's 2 at a time, but it works for me. Yeah, I really like these. I don't really have much to say about them because it's just a vanilla sock, but I love the colour. Actually, the colour scheme to me is kind of Christmassy. I don't know why. I think it's like why I associate the pink and white with Christmas, but in my head it's reminding me of, and we don't have Bath and Body Works in Ireland, but the last time I was in America was coming up to Christmas time, and Bath and Body Works had all of their Christmas scents in, and one of them, I'm convinced, was like a pink and white theme, and it was maybe like peppermint or something. So I think that's why I'm associating this with Christmas, but I might be imagining that. I don't think I am, so if you know the scent that I'm talking about, please let me know, and let me know that I'm not just making that up in my head. Yeah, I really love these. Hope they'll be finished by the next time I record. As I said, these 9-inch circulars, the socks are just flying off my needles. I used to wonder how people could get a pair of socks done in a week, and now I know. I think, like, I obviously have a lot more whips right now, but if I just had a pair of socks on 9-inch circulars, I think I could get them done in a few days. They've just been working up so fast, and I love it. It's great because I've got loads of sock yarns and sock sets there, and I now have confidence that I can actually get through them, which is great. But yeah, that's all I have to say about these. Nothing too groundbreaking, but yeah, I love them. We are near the end. My second last whip is a baby cardigan for a friend of mine who's having a baby boy. So I am referring to a pattern for stitch counts, but not following the pattern itself, and that is the Filca Lila Crispin pattern, which is all over textured cardigan. It is a gorgeous pattern, but I just wanted to do plain stockinette, so I have the same gauge as that pattern, so I just cast on the number of stitches indicated in that pattern for a 3-month-old, and I followed the instructions for the raglan increases, etc. The yarn that I'm using is Happy Sheep Baby Wool in the colour Cedar for the main colour, and Hobby Friends Extra Fine Merino in the colour Cream for the stripes. And if these yarns look familiar, it's because I used them in another baby cardigan very recently and they're leftovers from that. So this is kind of a stash project, but I do really like these colours together. I was hoping to just do the whole cardigan in the brown colour, but I definitely won't have enough, so that's why I started introducing some stripes. The stripes are just 2 rounds each, so I've carried the yarn up throughout so I don't have a million ends to weave in. So it actually has been a really easy and quick project to make. I remember the last baby cardigan I made had thicker stripes, so I was breaking yarn and weaving in ends, and I did feel like it took a little bit longer, but this one has been, and it was also a size bigger. I think that was a 6 month or 6 to 9 month, and this is 3 months, so it's working up very quickly. I started the sleeve last night and I only did this in like an hour, which is pretty quick considering it was on magic loop and I was constantly faffing about with carrying all the different coloured yarns up and stuff like that. I'm hoping to get this sleeve done very soon, maybe this weekend, and hopefully have the inner sleeve done within a week, and then I just have to do the button band. So I've never actually done a button band, like a pickup button band, so I thought a baby cardigan would be a great place to start, because it's not really high stakes and because it's so short. So I'm excited to do that, do a proper pickup button band. I've just noticed a drop stitch. That's a pity. Oh well. I use 2.5mm needles for the ribbing and 3mm needles for the body. Sorry, I should show it properly instead of just presenting it as a crumpled up ball. That's it there. I really like it. I wasn't sure how the stripes would look, but I really like how they're turning out. And I think when I have the button band in the dark brown to kind of border the stripes, as well as, you know, there's obviously the ribbing on the bottom, I think it will look really nice. The ribbing is all 1 by 1. So there is a deadline on this because my friend is having a baby shower type event, although she's not calling it a baby shower. It's basically a baby shower. And that's on the 12th of August, which is still a while away. It's like 3 or 4 weeks away, maybe? 3 weeks? 4 weeks? Anyway, very far away, but for some reason I thought this cardigan would take me a lot longer to make, so I started it quite early. But yeah, I'm fairly confident that I'll have it done in a week or 2. And that's, you know, in between working on my other whips as well. We finally made it to my last whip, which is Cami number 7 by My Favourite Things Knitwear, and I'm knitting this in Cotton Kings soft print 8/4, and I think the colour name is called Rose. It's either Rose or Soft Rose. It's got Rose in the name, and it's a variegated cotton, but it's variegated with tones of the same colour, so it's obviously not variegated in the sense it's got different colours in it. The only thing is that you do kind of, because it's machine dyed, you do kind of have to be careful with the striping or pooling effect that it might have. It's a lot more of a predictable colour pattern than it would be if it was hand dyed, for example. So I mentioned this in my stash busting video where I said I was going to make, I can't remember the name of it, Ingrid Top. It's the Ingrid Top by Gregoria Fibres, which has horizontal kind of lace bands. But I thought the yarn lended itself really well to this kind of texture in the Cami number 7, which is a broken rib texture. So I did a swatch on 3mm needles and I got gauge, so that's what I'm using at the moment. And for this pattern you basically make 4 of these triangles and then you join them in the round and work down, and then at some point you would obviously join at the top as well to get the shoulder straps. The 2 back panels are made slightly different from the front panels, with shorter straps. As far as I can tell, everything else with the panels is identical. And I'm making my straps even shorter because I know cotton will sag over time, and basically everyone on Ravelry, well, a large majority of people on Ravelry said that they wish they made the straps shorter, or else that they did make the straps shorter and they turned out the perfect length. So I have subtracted 10 rows from the straps, which sounded like a lot to me, and I wasn't sure if that was the right decision, but I have always found that I prefer my straps to be erring on the side of caution when it comes to being too short. I always feel whenever my straps do turn out a little bit too short, I am still glad that they are that short instead of too long. So I'd rather them be too short than too long, basically. So I am happy with my 10 rows subtracted. I think it will be fine. So I finished one back panel and I have started the second one this morning. They're working up pretty quickly. I'm looking forward to get this joined in the round. A lot of people on Ravelry said it takes a long time. I guess because of the broken rib pattern it may be a little bit longer than if it were all overstock in it, but that's fine. I am looking forward to having this top finished, but similar to my Kuutar top, I'm just not loving the yarn. Like it's a fine yarn, there's nothing wrong with it, but it's not one that I'm excited about because it's obviously been sitting in my stash for so long and I just want to get rid of it. So I'm excited to have the finished top. I'm not excited about knitting it. I think this will be my last summer stash busting project. I'm done with the stash busting. I'm done. I've done so much of it and I'm really proud of myself. So I think we could just call it a day after this one. So I'm really looking forward to having this top in my wardrobe. I love the kind of line details that you get with the increases, and especially after you join in the round you get this kind of, it curves back inwards, which I really like. So yeah, I think it's a really nice effect. I'm really excited to have it in my wardrobe. So I have some really exciting acquisitions that I've been wanting to talk about, and the first is some yarn that I got from Pigment & Ply, who I have mentioned before in this channel. I love her yarns and this collection was no exception. So she did a pre-order for the pre-Raphaelite collection. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. And the yarn arrived there a couple weeks ago. So the first thing I got was this sock set. The main colour is called Proud Maisie and the contrast colour is called Augustus and Mary, and it's a 75% superwash merino and 25% nylon. So the main colour is a combination of these just deep jewel tones and I think it's absolutely stunning. So there's magentas, there's greens, blues, teals, there's like ochre yellows in there, and when I kind of tease apart the skein I can see even more colours, you know, coming through that I didn't see before, which I just think it's absolutely beautiful. And I've spoken really highly of her yarn before. This is no exception. It's beautiful. The contrast colour is this kind of muted aubergine colour. And she also included this little stitch marker, so that was a really nice surprise because I didn't order anything like that, and when I opened the package and saw this little cute rose stitch marker attached, I just thought that's such a nice little thing to include. So yeah, I'm really impressed. These are going to be a vanilla sock, I think. It's just a pity that my socks only take 60 grams of yarn because I would love to use all of this yarn. I think it's a beautiful colour and I can't wait to knit with it. The other yarn that I got from that pre-order was one skein of this 100% superwash merino, and the colour is called Honeyed Cakes and 2 coins. And it's just a combination of pinks, corals, some greens, and then it's speckled throughout with yellows and yeah, just like yellows and oranges I guess. And I would love to use this to make an alpine bloom tee, where this would be the flowers or the contrast colour, and I would love to hold it with like a greyish for the main colour. Not hold it with. I would love for a greyish to be kind of the main colour of the t-shirt. That's my tentative plan for this. It's not going to happen anytime soon, but that's what I bought this with the intention of making. I think it's great to have a yarn dyer in Europe. Obviously she's not in the EU, so there is customs fees when I order from her, but it's fine. The shipping fees are low enough that I don't really mind. And the other yarn I have is from a yarn shop in Marseille, so that's where I was. This trip that I've been mentioning, it was Marseille. Don't know why I didn't say that. And there's a yarn shop there called La Droguerie, which is French, but I can't speak French, so I'm sorry. And they have another shop in Paris that I went to last year, and I picked up a really nice cotton bamboo yarn when I was there. So I was really excited to go to the one in Marseille. And I picked up this yarn, which is called Kaleido, and it's 92% bamboo and 8% linen, and this is in the colour Blue Sapphire. So I got 300 grams of this, and I thought it would be perfect for a rolled edge tank by Jessie May. I really like that design. It's got the kind of typical rolled stockinette edges that we've been seeing a lot of this summer, but what I especially like is the hem, the way the hem kind of splits. It's not really a split hem, it kind of is, but I really like that effect. Yeah, I am very excited to work with this. As I said, I had a similar yarn from them before. It was 50% cotton, 50% bamboo I think, and I really enjoyed working with it. I actually made a Jessie May pattern with that yarn as well, so that's just a coincidence. One thing that I really like about that yarn shop is that they give you this little paper information sheet every time you buy the yarn. I suppose it's equivalent to a yarn label, but it actually has information about the fibres on the back, so it tells you, it's in French, so I don't know what it says right now, but I did translate it at the time, and it says, you know, the benefits of using bamboo, the benefits of linen, and then obviously it has the washing instructions, the gauge, the yarn weight, things like that. So yeah, I really like these little information sheets that you get when you buy the yarn. Also, The most interesting thing about that shop is that it's yarn by the meter, so they have just walls full of big loops of yarn, and you just tell them how much you need and they wind off that much. So it's great for making sure that you don't, you know, buy too much. If you only need 50 grams, you can buy 50 grams. You don't have to buy a 100 gram skein, which I think is fantastic. So yeah, if you're ever in Paris or Marseille, would definitely recommend going to that yarn shop. I really love it there. And they do have animal fibres as well, but I've only ever bought the plant fibres from there, but maybe one day I'll get the animal fibres as well. So I kind of want to talk about plans, but not in the sense that I have plans, more in the sense that I just want to get my thoughts out there and maybe get some insights, and would love to hear opinions from the knitting community here on YouTube, because I've obviously been doing a lot of stash busting this summer, and I have, as I said, I've enjoyed the finished projects, but I haven't been enjoying making the projects. Like, they're not passion projects for me, and part of me has been worried lately that I'm in a knitting slump, that I maybe lost my knitting mojo. But then I think about the projects that I actually have been enjoying, which are been my sweet shop blanket, even my vanilla socks. Like, I've been really enjoying working on vanilla socks, my poppy tea, and those are all projects that are not made with stash yarn, like old stash yarn, and they're projects that I'm making for me. So when I spell it out that way, it seems obvious to me that I haven't lost my knitting mojo. I've just been torturing myself, forcing myself to make things that I haven't been enjoying. So that's why I'm not going to make any more stash busting project once I'm finished this cami number 7. And I don't know if I'm going to make another summer project, because we have not had much of a summer here in Ireland. We usually get like 2 weeks of a heat wave at some point during the summer, and we just haven't had that, and I don't know if we're going to. And I've kind of been holding out, and I've been making my summer projects thinking, no, we'll get our heat wave, and we just haven't had it yet, and I don't know if we're going to. So I feel like I've been making things that I haven't been able to wear as well, which is part of the reason why I haven't been enjoying making them. Like my Kuutar top, my cami number 7, I don't know when I'm going to be able to wear that. It might not be until next summer. It might not be until I go abroad somewhere, which I haven't got any plans. So anyway, these are all thoughts that have been going through my head lately, and I know I mentioned in my last video, and maybe the video before that as well, no, just my last video about the Rivendell cardigan, that I want to cast that on. Immediately after uploading that, I got comments saying, yeah, you should definitely cast that on. And then at that point it was kind of sunny out, so I was like, I don't want to cast that on now, it's wool and mohair, I don't want to cast that on. I didn't cast it on because I was thinking there might have been like a day when it was 18 degrees out, and I was like, okay, this is it, this is our heat wave, I'm not going to cast on a wool and mohair cardigan. And then the next day it was rainy and grey and overcast, and then I was like, okay, I'm going to cast on my wool and mohair cardigan. I'll cast it on tomorrow. And then the next day it was sunny again, so I was just like all over the place, and I didn't cast it on, essentially. Basically now I am ready to cast it on, definitely. I'm 100% going to cast it on soon. But I have some big changes that I want to make to it, and I don't know if these changes are feasible. I am a relatively new knitter. I've only been knitting for less than 2 years, and I very rarely make modifications. If I do, it's a modification that I'm sure will work out, like shortening straps, lengthening a top, that kind of thing. When I was crocheting more, I used to make a lot more modifications. I was just a lot more confident in my ability to modify things. But with knitting, I feel like maybe because it's more time consuming, that if you make a modification and it doesn't work out, then you've got more frogging to do, or more, you know, you've lost more hours of work. So maybe that's been putting me off. But I want to make some big changes to this cardigan, and like I spent last night scribbling out things to try and figure out what I was going to do. Basically the change I want to make is, there is a cable detail going up the sleeve, but it only starts at where the sleeve starts. So the drop shoulder goes down quite low, and then the cable detail starts with the sleeve. So I think it looks a bit strange, because you've kind of got this C of a moss stitch going halfway down the arm, and then you've got the cable starting about halfway down the sleeve. Maybe not halfway, but like a good bit down, and I just don't like that look. I think the cable detail would look a lot better if it started up here, and I don't know how to do that. And I was scouring Ravelry for similar patterns that had a cable detail that went up here along with a cable detail that goes around a v-neck. The other thing that I don't like is that the cable that goes along the neck stops just at the seam here, and there's nothing on the back. And to me, when you see the back, all I can see is a sea of moss stitch. Like, it doesn't, there's nothing to break it up, and it would be nice if there was something to break it up. So I spent hours figuring out what I was going to do, and I noticed that the cable detail on the sleeve, it's got these sections of, they are purl and knit stitches, but they're done in such a way that it looks, it's quite a strong texture. The shoulder seam lines up with one of those rows, so I was thinking that I could have an effect on the back that would essentially line up with the same point in the cable pattern on the sleeve. I don't know if that makes any sense. Am I gonna have to draw this out? I mean, I did draw it out, but it doesn't look like it makes any sense to anyone else. So it would essentially mean casting on 6 or 7 stitches with a provisional cast on, and working that knit purl pattern back and forth just for the length of, just until the cable pattern that starts here, just until the end of that cable pattern, so like here, and then putting those stitches on hold. And then I would have to go back and pick up stitches along here and work the cable pattern going down this way, and then I would put those stitches on hold. Okay, and then I would have to pick up from here and basically work the sleeve cable pattern, and at the same time pick up the stitches on hold at the back, so that it would continue on into the sleeve cable pattern. Does that make any sense? Then I would have to work that until I reach kind of the drop shoulder section. Oh god, I don't know if that makes any sense. And then I would have to do the same on the other side. And then once that is done, I could go to the bottom of that strip, pick up the stitches there. I would have to pick up from the middle so that I could work short rows to make the back panel increases, and then that would be the back panel. The other thing that I might have to consider is the fact that in the pattern, once you start working the front, there are increases obviously to shape the v-neck. So if I just did the cable section here, if I just did a cable section going down along here and then picked up stitches and worked cable section going down along the sleeve, where would I put increases? Like, they would have to be, I would have to work this cable section, pick it up from here, and I would have to do some form of short rows to get that wedge that goes down here, because that's the way it's done in the pattern, except it's obviously done horizontally because that's the way you work. My shoulder's going red from me rubbing it so much. The other option that I was thinking of doing was working the cable section that's on the front, basically just casting off for the cable section and doing a big strip that goes around here, and then picking up stitches all along the outside and doing a raglan. And I would do the sleeve cable section and I would do raglan increases on either side of it. My concern with that is that this strip wouldn't have any shaping, so obviously if I knit just a big long cable, it's going to lie flat, and if I try and wrap it around my neck like a cardigan, would it lie okay? Would it look okay, or would it look weird? So lots to think about. I'm kind of determined to get something working for it, because I just don't like, as I said, how far down the cable section starts. And I've thought so much about it that it would be a shame to just follow the pattern the way it's written at this point. I think it will be a good challenge for myself to try and figure out how I can do it. I don't know if I'm being way too ambitious. Any of that made sense, and if you know if it's possible, or if you have any better suggestions, although I know that's a big ask because it's a big change that I'm trying to make, and I'm essentially trying to rewrite a pattern, which is a lot of work. So I don't know. I'm thinking I could obviously just try it out and see, but it's a lot of work to frog if it doesn't work. I think the first plan makes the most sense. It might not make sense the way I've said it, but the way I've written it out, it makes sense. If you're still watching, I apologise for these rambling thoughts. I don't really have any other plans to be talking about anyway, so I am determined to make something work. I'm determined to cast that on pretty soon, while I still have the motivation to do it. Realistically, I'm going to end up just trying out that first idea. I think now that our brains are all sufficiently fried, I will leave it at that. So thank you so much for watching, and if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps. Please subscribe if you haven't already. I am close to 1,000 subscribers, but not so close that I'm going to start getting my hopes up anytime soon. But if you are watching this and you haven't subscribed and you like the content, please consider subscribing. it would mean a lot and it would really help out the channel. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!